Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY boat refitting video here aboard good old Athena. Who's ready to see the first of the new bulkheads installed here aboard Athena? I know I sure am. And in this video I can also show you a drawing of Athena's brand new layout. This is gonna be very cool. Over the last couple of months, I've torn out a sizable chunk of the interior here aboard Athena. I've also started reinforcing the structural grid underneath the cabin sole. There's still some work to be done there, but I've gotten far enough that I can go ahead and put in the first of the new bulkheads. You might just barely be able to spot the template for the new bulkhead. I made that in last weekend's video, besides also laying up an ungodly amount of glass. But before we get to that, let's check out the drawing for Athena's new layout. To give you guys a point of reference, here is a drawing of Athena's old layout. But don't pay any attention to the forward cabin, that is not done yet. But what you should pay attention to on this drawing is the bulkhead right here and also the one down here. Now let's switch this to the new, glorious and much improved layout. As you can see here, the bulkheads that were here and here have been moved. The one on the starboard side has been moved forward, so now it's here rather than back here. And the one on the port side has been moved aft so that it's here rather than here. That makes the head a fair bit larger, and that means we can have a separate shower in there, which is going to be awesome because it means water doesn't go everywhere, and also it's going to be a lot easier for keeping clean. Now up here, by moving the bulkhead further aft, that means we can move the chart table out of the aft cabin into the main saloon. But it's not really going to be a true chart table anymore. It's more going to be a little workspace where you can sit comfortably with your laptop. I think that is much more important than a dedicated chart table. Also, notice that the door has been moved from this side over here to over here. Of course, moving the chart table in here is going to take away some space from the galley, but we're going to get that back and even more space by converting the settee that was here into a little kitchen island. The top of the little kitchen island here is going to be at the same level as the countertop in the rest of the galley, so this is going to be very useful space. And there's also going to be a few drawers in here for storage. The bottom half of this is going to be housing a diesel tank that's actually going to extend out pretty far underneath the cabin sole. It's going to be somewhere around 210 gallons. The little table that's attached to the kitchen island here is going to be a fair bit lower so that it matches the height of a traditional sort of coffee table. And this is, or at least I hope, it's going to be partly able to slide into here just to free up some space here, because we've got some other cool plans for this area, but those are not finalized yet. Last but certainly not least, there is this little access hatch here, which gives you access into the technical area through the head. Now the layout for the head has not really been finalized yet, because this is a somewhat complicated 3D space, and once I've got the bulkhead in here, I think I'm going to mock this up using some cardboard just to make absolutely sure there's plenty of opportunity to brace yourself and that this is in fact the optimal layout. But yeah, this is sort of the overall plan. What I've just shown you is what I'm shooting for. I fully expect there to be some minor changes and tweaks as we progress, but yeah, it is going to be incredibly cool to see this space transform into that. Here is a quick glimpse of the state of the interior. As you can see, it looks pretty rough, but over the next coming weeks, you should slowly see this transform into a much more usable space. Let's head up to the workshop and check on the plywood I'm going to be using for the new bulkheads, as well as all of the interior. I'm going to bring this little sample of the old bulkhead with me. Welcome back to the now somewhat cluttered workshop. The 12mm Ukume plywood I'm going to be using is right over here. This is really good quality plywood. It's the same stuff I used aboard Obelix. It is somewhat expensive at over $100 per sheet, but it is not sold as marine grade plywood. Before anybody gets outraged and rushes to their keyboard to yell at me for using exterior grade plywood for a structural bulkhead, let me just say this. It's not important what the plywood is sold as, it is the actual quality of the plywood that's important. Let me throw a few quick bullet points at you. Here in Denmark, you can't buy plywood that's sold as, for instance, BS 1088. It simply just doesn't exist here. The plywood I've got here uses the same VPP glue that's used in marine grade plywood, and this species of wood is also used in marine grade plywood. I know from experience that there's absolutely no voids or gaps in this. The Danish boat builder Exjagt uses this exact same type of plywood for bulkheads in their boats. Or at least they did up to 2012. I don't know if that's changed since then. Hopefully those little bullet points will soothe the outrage over my choice of plywood. Remember, it's not important what it's sold as, it is the actual quality of the plywood that matters. The companionway aboard Athena is not wide enough for me to fit a full sheet of plywood through there. So for me to be able to get the plywood aboard the boat, I'm going to have to split the plywood up here at the workshop and then join the pieces back together aboard the boat. For this, I want to use some kind of joint that has proven its worth in this type of application. For instance, I don't believe something with a spline or biscuits would be suited for a bulkhead. After much research on the interwebs, I've found two options here. One is a scarf joint and the other is a payson or glassed butt joint. The scarf joint here is a well-proven and fairly straightforward way of joining two pieces of wood together. The upside to a joint like this is that it's very easy to join back together, and it's also fairly cheap when it comes to epoxy. The downside is that this requires a little bit more woodworking. It's important that this is somewhat accurate, and also the ratio for this scarf here is very important. The other option I mentioned is this glassed butt joint. I believe this was popularized during the 80s, and the woodworking part of this is a fair bit easier. If this had just been a butt joint, this joint would have roughly 20% of the strength of the plywood, but by adding the glass on the top and the bottom, this joint should be as strong or stronger than the plywood. There are some upsides to this type of joint. Because it is a butt joint, there is no waste. With the scarf joint, you have some overlap, and that is just going to be wasted plywood. Like I mentioned, the woodworking required in this type of joint is a lot more straightforward than a scarf joint. It is just a matter of removing about a millimeter and a half of material, so you have something to lay the glass into so it doesn't stay proud of the surface. And then, well, that's basically it. Now, in terms of downsides, gluing this back together is going to be a little bit more labor intensive because you have to add glass to both of the sides as well as thickened epoxy here in the middle. I would trust either one of these joints for the bulkhead. Now, there are other options out there, and there's also an almost unlimited variation on those options. But yeah, I've chosen to go with one of these. To ease the amount of woodworking required for the scarf joint, I attempted to make a little jig for my electric planer. As you can see on this little test piece here, which is, by the way, much cheaper plywood that is filled with gaps and voids, but as you can see on this little test piece here, the jig worked out fairly well. The only problem is I was only able to achieve a 1 to 6.6 ratio. That might be fine for the bulkhead. I'm pretty sure it would be okay, but generally speaking, for a scarf joint, a ratio of 1 to 8 would be preferable. So yeah, this is a little bit short. I am pulling on this as hard as I can right now. I think it's fair to say that both of these joints are pretty strong. There are other well-proven scarfing jigs out there for both planers and circular saws. I thought it might be fun to try and build my own, and it almost kind of worked out. For the joint on the first bulkhead, I'm going to go with the glassed butt joint. Having transformed my car to the DIY version of a clown car, let's head down to the boat and get these glued together. It's the next day. Last night I cheated a little bit and laid up glass on the first side of that first sheet of plywood off camera. But let's set up and I'll show you. As you can see here inside the boat, that full sheet of plywood takes up a ton of space. I've laid up 2 layers of 600 gram BX, that should be plenty strong. Before I did that, I stabilized the joint with some melamine shelves. And you can see those here underneath the plywood. The result is a completely flat piece of plywood where all I need to do is just to flip it over and repeat the process. I've removed the little bit of squeeze out I had, so now we're ready for glass. Before leaving the workshop, I cut set glass into strips so it's easy to apply, and I also cut some peel ply. Morning guys, it is Saturday morning. Today is gonna be bulkhead fitting day. The boat is tilting a little bit towards starboard, sitting in its cradle, so I can't use the laser level on its own to line up the new bulkhead. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but I've lined up the laser so that it is in fact level, and up here it's just touching this bit of teak trim, while down here there's about a 5 centimeter gap. The easiest way for me to compensate for that is to tilt the laser level a little bit. That is going to mean the gimbal mechanism in there is going to jam up, which means it's no longer going to be level, which means I can adjust the line on the bulkhead to match that piece of trim. As you can hopefully see, now the dotted line of the laser is 100% parallel to that piece of teak, and that is going to be my reference. And now the laser is also telling me where to cut my template, right here and up here. Before I pull down the template and start cutting the plywood, there is one thing about how the old bulkhead is tabbed to the hull I want to check, because there are some differing opinions as to how this should be done. As you can see in here, there is a little bit of a gap between the bulkhead and the hull, and while you could chalk that up to the bulkhead just being cut in a hurry, there might actually be a good reason for this. That gap is there, or at least the theory is that it's there to prevent the bulkhead from printing through, meaning being visible on the outside of the hull because it's pressing out on the hull, and also from forming any kind of hard spots. Now I think the printing through of the bulkhead is probably going to be more pronounced if you're using polyester, because when that cures it does shrink about 7%, whereas epoxy only shrinks about 2%. But yeah, let's go ahead and leave a little bit of a gap there. It seemed to work fine the last 30 years. I've never used MDF and hot glue to make a template for anything before, so I'm curious to see how strong of a bond that's going to be in here. So last weekend when I made the template, I also made this. And yep, that is pretty strong. Hopefully that will translate into the template not falling apart when I'm moving it around. But before I start moving it around, let's just get the piece of plywood ready. As the astute will no doubt have noted, this is a very long piece of very thin MDF, so there's probably going to be a bit of flex to it. Before pulling down the template, I measured the height, and I'm just going to make sure that this distance is the same. Okay, it looks like it is off by about 4 millimeters. Having checked that measurement twice, I think we're now ready to trace the outline of the template onto the plywood. It's only barely showing up on camera, but it is funny seeing this because this makes the interior space look a lot smaller than when you're actually standing in here. The way I've cut this leaves me absolutely no gap, but I figured it was easier to do a rough cut, test fit it, and then we can trim it. I just really don't want to have to lay up another one of these. I'm definitely going to have to do a little bit of trimming up here. After copious amounts of fiddling about, I think we've got a winner chicken dinner. The gap I mentioned before is typically not used with a sandwich construction, which is what's up here and also in here. It's only used with solid laminate, and to be frank, I don't even know if it matters, but that's the way the old bulkhead was put in, so that's what I'm gonna do for the new one. Using a block of wood that's held in place with some hot glue, I've aligned the bulkhead so it's within 4 millimeters of the old bulkhead. And judging by the line from the laser, we should be spot on here too. So let's go ahead and get this secured. I'm of course going to be tabbing the new bulkhead to the hull. For me to be able to do that, I need to be able to push in on the bulkhead a little bit to air out the laminate. So I've moved some of these blocks I used for the template. These were just held in place by hot glue, but that was a surprisingly good bond. There is fiberglass fibers stuck in the hot glue. This is the bulkhead in its final position. Now it's just a matter of doing a tiny bit more sanding, and then we can tab it to the hull. I swung by the workshop and cut some strips of fiberglass. I'm going to be using 4 layers of 600 gram BX on each side. That is very much overkill, but there is no harm in it. There's going to be a 2 centimeter overlap. The widest strip is 20 centimeters, and I'm going to wet it out here on the cabin sole just to make life a little bit easier. Before I start wetting out the glass, I'm just going to coat the surface of the plywood. That way the wood has a bit of time to absorb some epoxy before I start adding glass. Let's take care of this little bit of glasswork in turbo mode. Cue the music. Good morning, guys. It is Sunday morning, and today is also a very exciting day because today I can go ahead and remove the old bulkhead. Why is that exciting? Well, because that's going to give both you guys and me the first real look at the size of the new head. The tabbing turned out okay. It's not the neatest of job. As you can see, there's epoxy kind of everywhere, but all of this is going to get covered, so you're not going to be able to see it, so it's okay. And there we have it, the new cavernous head. Now let's not ponder too long what this mysterious black spot under where the head used to be is, because I think that's best just left alone. Are you black mold or a 30-year-old poop spot? Because you could look like either one. This is gonna be the spiffiest head in all of the land. I'm gonna leave this thing here until I'm ready to put in the piece of plywood that goes here, just to help support the cabin top, but you guys can still get a pretty good idea of the amount of room in here. It's about 1.55 meters from the aft end to the forward end. The width is a little bit more difficult to measure because the hull curves, but there's gonna be a piece of plywood that goes here, so that gives you guys sort of an idea of this big space here. That's probably going to be the shower. Here's a quick glimpse at the drawing from the beginning of the video. The bulkhead we've just put in is this one right here. And as you can see, the shower goes here, head there, sink there. In my drawing, I've let the shower occupy 65 centimeters. That would put the end of the shower right here, because I'm figuring you're going to be showering sideways, so there doesn't need to be an absorbent amount of room this way. And that leaves all of this room over here free for the head and a little sink. But like I said in the beginning of the video, that is a somewhat complicated 3D space because of the curvature of the hull. So I think the best thing I can do is, once I'm done laying up all of the glass and I've put in all of the new bulkheads, well, then I can mock up the new head with some cardboard and see what works the best. It's going to be an interesting balancing act because I would like it to be spacious in there, but I also want you to be able to brace yourself when you're sitting on the throne while on the way. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of fiddling about with this. I've got a bit of cleanup to take care of, and I also need to glass the other side of that bulkhead, so I think I'm going to end this video here. Now next weekend's video, I am probably going to be putting in the new bulkhead on the starboard side here, so I can move all of my tools and epoxy from the port side to the starboard side and gain access to the port side. But yeah, I don't know, we'll see what happens. It's going to be fun no matter what. And yeah, if you've got any kind of feedback about the head design, I would love to hear it. And other than that, that is going to be it for this video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!